This 44-foot, 5-ton statue of a Wichita chief by Kansan artist Black Bear Boson is one of the few reminders of those times. From his earthbound pedestal, Boson's evocative figure seems to reach for the Kansas sky in a deeply spiritual gesture of hope. 130 miles to the northeast, in Topeka, Richard Bergen's statue of a Kansa warrior strikes a much more aggressive pose. From his perch atop the Kansas state capitol, he takes aim at the North Star, making for a suitably defiant landmark in a capital city that almost wasn't the capital at all. It had to win the title in a conflict that earned the future state fame as Bleeding Kansas and helped to spark the Civil War. By 1854, the U.S. was divided into slave states in the South and free states in the North and West. Sandwiched in the middle, the Kansas Territory was forced to choose which side it would be on by popular vote. Pro- and anti-slavery settlers poured into the territory in hopes of turning the tide their way. On May 21st, 1856, open warfare erupted when pro-slavery forces invaded the new abolitionist outpost of Lawrence, ransacked its downtown, and burned the offices of its anti-slavery newspapers and the Free State Hotel to the ground. Locals claim that the Free State's owner, Colonel Shalor Eldridge, vowed to rebuild and to rebuild again if needed, adding a floor each time. Today, his third hotel, built after raiders burned the second one down during the Civil War, still stands on the same spot. But in 1856, rebuilding wasn't enough for uncompromising abolitionist John Brown. He demanded vengeance for the assault on Lawrence. So, on May 24th, he and 4 of his sons went out and hacked 5 of their pro-slavery neighbors to death with broadswords in the infamous slaughter of Pottawatomie Creek. As news of the massacre spread, a pro-slavery posse led by Henry Clay Pate seized 2 of Brown's sons and charged them with murder. Brown didn't wait to be next. On the morning of June 2nd, 1856, he and 35 of his followers attacked Pate and 70 of his men here in Blackjack Field. It's been called the first battle of the Civil War. The outnumbered abolitionists won it hands down. Brown captured Pate and many of his men, and then forced them to release his sons in exchange for their own freedom. It was a major victory for the anti-slavery side, but that didn't stop the pro-slavery forces from charging ahead with their plans for the state. In 1857, they declared Lecompton the new capital and met here in this small building's second-floor courtroom to draft a pro-slavery constitution. It's still known as Constitution Hall to this day. But when the U.S. Congress refused to ratify the document written here, the tide turned. New elections gave abolitionists the upper hand. In 1861, Kansas entered the Union as a free state, with Topeka as its capital. Construction of the Capitol building began in 1866. It would take 37 years to finish the job. Its dome would have to wait even longer to receive its finishing touch, until 2002, when Bergen's 4,420-pound warrior was finally hoisted onto its peak, to become the symbol of a state that fought to be free, yet struggled for decades after statehood to live up to freedom's ideals. As Native Americans were systematically oppressed, and African Americans in Kansas were forced to accept second best, Kansans like the Brown family of Topeka. In 1950, Reverend Oliver Brown walked down these streets to his neighborhood's Sumner Elementary School to enroll his daughter Linda in the 3rd grade. But they were turned away. Sumner, they were told, was for white children only. So, the Browns, 12 other black Topeka families, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People sued the school board in federal court. Linda's father, Oliver, became the lead plaintiff in a groundbreaking case that would go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court as Brown versus Board of Education. The court's landmark unanimous ruling in their favor ended decades of school segregation in Topeka and across America, and guaranteed equal educational opportunities to all, making Linda Brown and Topeka twin symbols of a time when America reaffirmed and re-embraced its greatest ideals. A time that began when the Browns and 12 other brave families took a stand for freedom here in Kansas.
Kansas, people think that it's only dedicated to tornadoes and bad weather, in which it is to a certain degree, but now since our weather patterns has changed, it's no longer considered the tornado alley that at one time it used to be. Over in the Wichita area, where they make the Boeing private airlines, I don't know if they're still going or not, but Kansas by and large is a flat state. Whenever I was out in Kansas City, Missouri, I went over the Missouri River several different times and wound up going over into the Capitol, checking it out, and just venturing into that in which what they had going on at the time, in which it was a thriving area. It was promoted with a lot of commerce up in the northeastern part of the state, and it had a lot of architectural design to it. For a northern city, I found it to be appealing of so much historical artifacts, more so than Kansas City, Missouri. Now, if you'll go over into St. Louis and even Jefferson City, that's where you'll find a lot more of your historical artifacts, because the way that I understand it, St. Louis is about 90 years older than Kansas City, Missouri, because of the difference of the mighty Mississippi. I didn't know that Kansas had such of a struggle back during the Civil War era. That only makes sense because of them being bordered right next to Missouri, of how divided that Missouri was during that time, whenever the North fought for slavery and the South fought against it. It was a divided state, Missouri was, and I guess to this day that's the reason why that they still use their I don't know what you'd call it, part of their slang as far as the great show me state. I'm sure it's recognized in their historical books toward just exactly where that come from. But I thought that I would share that with my viewers, since all this has come up here recently about the Confederacy and about slavery and all this other stuff. I found it to be very historically significant. Thanks again. Shalom.